Have you ever really thought about how the human brain gets built? I mean, it's the most complex thing we know of, and it doesn't just appear. It actually starts as a single, simple sheet of cells and then goes through one of the most amazing construction projects in all of biology. So today, let's break down that blueprint. And just to get a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about, get this. Those very first cells that form the brain, they're going to go through more than 28 rounds of division. That's not just doubling 28 times. It's a cellular explosion that sets the stage for everything that follows. So, where does a massive project like this even begin? Well, like any good building, it starts with a solid blueprint. And for the brain, that blueprint starts to emerge in the early embryo from just a specialized little patch of cells. Okay, so what you're seeing here are the very first steps of construction. First, you get this flat sheet of cells, that's the neural plate. Then, almost like you're folding a piece of paper in on itself, it makes a little trench, the neural groove. And finally, the edges of that fold meet and fuse together, creating the neural tube. That hollow structure right there, that's the foundation for the entire brain and spinal cord. And this all happens incredibly fast. This timeline really gives you a sense of the pace. By week 3, that tube is already getting organized into zones for controlling movement and processing senses. Just 2 weeks later, the forebrain starts taking shape. By week 6, the cerebellum, which is so important for motor control, begins to form. And by week 8, you've already got the precursor to our super complex cerebral cortex. I mean, the pace is just breathtaking. So let's see how this thing goes from a simple tube to something we'd actually recognize as a brain. This is where the physical transformation gets really, really dramatic. In the very earliest stage, it's really just 3 simple bumps. You've got the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. It's pretty elegant in its simplicity, but believe me, it is not going to stay this way for long. So here's a really cool problem evolution had to solve. The brain grows way faster than the skull it's inside of. So to fit, it has to fold. This folding is just a brilliant solution, right? It packs the maximum amount of processing power into a very limited space. And you can see these first major bends right here. They're called the cephalic and cervical flexures, and they start to give the brain that classic C shape. Now, let's fast forward to 21 weeks. You can see the next major leap. The main lobes are all there. You can clearly make out the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. The overall shape is right, but notice how smooth the surface is. All those iconic wrinkles we associate with the brain, they haven't shown up yet. Now look at the difference just 3 weeks makes. It's incredible. By week 24, the brain has absolutely ballooned in size, and those critical folds and fissures are starting to carve up the surface. This dramatically increases the surface area, making more room for all those new neurons. Okay, we've seen the big picture, the large-scale architecture. Now let's zoom way, way into the microscopic level and meet the actual construction workers of this project, the neurons. And let me tell you, they have to take an incredible journey. So, how do they get where they need to go? Well, you can think of these things called radial glial cells as living scaffolding. They literally create these long ladders that stretch across the entire width of the developing brain wall, giving newborn neurons a perfect pathway to climb to their final destinations. And the way they build the 6 layers of the cortex is just fascinating. It's a total inside-out job. The first wave of neurons shows up and forms the deepest layers. Then, the next wave has to climb past them to form the middle layers. And finally, the very last cells to arrive have to travel the furthest, climbing past everyone else, to form the outermost layers. It's like building a skyscraper, but for every new floor, the workers have to climb up the outside of the building and build on top. So how does a neuron know when to hop off the ladder? Well, the answer is a protein called reelin. You can think of reelin as the construction foreman. It's hanging out at the very top, and as a neuron climbs up, reelin basically yells, "Stop here, this is your floor." It's this signal that makes sure every cell gets to its proper place, creating those perfectly organized layers of the cortex. Okay, so the structure is built, the workers are all in place, but a building isn't much use without electricity, plumbing, and Wi-Fi, right? Now it's time to wire the entire system up and actually make it functional. This happens through 2 really important processes. First, you have synaptogenesis. That's just a fancy word for creating trillions of connections, or synapses, between all the neurons. Then, you have myelination, which is like insulating all those new wires. A fatty substance called myelin wraps around the nerve fibers, and that makes the signals travel way, way faster and more efficiently.
Now, what's really crucial to understand is that this whole myelination process doesn't happen all at once. Some pathways get insulated much later than others. And a key example of this is the pyramidal tract. That's the superhighway that controls all of our voluntary movements. It's one of the very last major pathways to get its high-speed coding.
Which leads to a really practical question. What does this slow wiring process actually mean for a newborn baby? What's the real-world consequence? Well, the answer explains a classic newborn reflex called the Babinski sign. If you gently stroke the sole of a baby's foot, their toes fan out and up, instead of curling in like an adult's. Why? It's because that curl your toes signal from the brain is just too slow, thanks to that unmyelinated pathway. Then, as that highway gets properly insulated over the first year or two of life, the reflex disappears. It's a perfect, visible sign of the brain's wiring getting up to speed. And that brings us to a final and maybe the most crucial point of all. The end of pregnancy is not the end of construction. At the moment of birth, the grain is really an unfinished masterpiece. Here's the bottom line. While all the heavy construction is done before birth, the fine-tuning, the interior decorating, that goes on for decades. The creation of new connections, synaptogenesis, actually hits its peak after birth, during the first year of life. And the specialization of all that wiring continues well into adulthood. You see, birth is really just the grand opening. It's not the end of the project. It's a pretty incredible thought, isn't it? This process of building, of refining, and remodeling, it never truly stops. As you're watching this, as you're listening and learning, your brain is actively modifying its own wiring. The construction is still underway. So the question is, what is your brain building at this very moment?